Hello, everyone. My name is Ariella Wagner. I'm the founder of SunRay Construction Solutions, a national construction document service. Today, we have a very, very important webinar conducted by an extraordinary construction attorney, Emily Pendleton, on a contractor, subcontractors, and suppliers step-by-step guide to getting paid. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the fabulous Emily.
Thanks, Ariella. So today we're going to be talking about a step-by-step guide to getting paid on Texas construction projects. Let's see. It is not letting me change my screen. Let me see.
That's okay. All you have to do is press the space bar.
Oh.
And that should help. No? Or maybe the arrow to the right. If you click on the right arrow. There you go.
There we go. Okay, awesome. It's working. All right, so there should be a text box with questions. Hopefully we have a little bit of time at the end. If anything comes up and you have a question, I'll be able to answer them at the end of the presentation. All right, so a little bit of housekeeping rules just as we get started. On the applicability of the step-by-step guide I'm going to be talking about today. In order to preserve your right to payment, you're going to have to first evaluate the type of project that you're working on, right? And so in Texas, we've got our private projects and we've got our public projects. And so today's presentation is going to be focused on preserving your right to payment on private commercial projects in Texas. We're not going to be focused on residential projects or any sort of public projects that are required to be bonded. That'll be the topic of another presentation that I'll provide. But so today's presentation, again, is focused on getting paid when you provide labor or materials on a private commercial project. Another key point before we get into the step-by-step guide is to understand that there were numerous changes made to the statutes that are applicable to Texas lien laws. They were implemented at the beginning of this year, 2022, in order to streamline the lien perfection process and make things easier. But in doing so, that creates kind of another understanding that you have to know before you implement these rules, because it's going to be important to understand when the project started. So if you're providing labor or materials to a Texas commercial private project and you're unpaid, but the project started prior to 2022, the step-by-step guide is going to be a little bit different than what I'm talking about today. So you'll certainly want to reach out to Ariella, reach out to me in order to understand the nuances. So today's presentation is focused on projects that started in 2022, January 1st or anytime after. And so when I say projects starting in January of 2022 or after, we're talking about the original contract. So the original contract being the contract between the owner and the general contractor. And so the step-by-step guide in today's presentation is for projects, again, starting January 1st, 2022 or sometime after. So just be sure and be cognizant of where you fall in the timeline of the big picture of the construction project that you're working on. All right, so let's talk about the steps and how to perfect a statutory lien and get paid. So there's 4 steps you need to be aware of. First, we're talking about sending the pre-lien notice. Second, you're going to want to record your lien affidavit. Third step is going to send your notice after recording your lien affidavit. And finally, if those steps don't get you paid, you're going to want to file suit to foreclose on your lien. So this presentation is going to break down further information on satisfying each of these steps to get you paid. All right, so step number one, the pre-lien notice. The recent changes to Chapter 53 that I talked about makes the pre-lien notice super simple. It is simply a statutory form. It's under Section 53056 of the Texas Property Code. And here on the slide is the form in which you simply need to fill in the blanks and in order to satisfy the requirements needed for a pre-lien notice. All right, so who needs to send a pre-lien notice? You have to evaluate where you fall in the construction players within, you were talking about the owner, the general contractor, the subcontractor, a second tier subcontractor, a third tier subcontractor. You're going to need to evaluate your upstream contractual relationship to determine whether or not you need to send a pre-lien notice. So pre-lien notices are required for anyone classified as a subcontractor under the statute, but is not required for an original contractor. So under the statute, an original contractor is anyone who's in privity with the owner or the owner's agent. And today's presentation, I'll be referring to them either as an original contractor, prime contractor, or general contractor. Under the statute, a subcontractor is anyone who performs work subject to a contract or obligation to the original contractor or to a subcontractor of any tier. So this includes, material suppliers, vendors, second tier subcontractors, third tier subcontractors. These are the entities that are going to be required to send out that pre-lien notice under step one. And so here is everybody highlighted in red is required to send a pre-lien notice in this example. All right, so who do you need to send your pre-lien notice to? You're going to need to send your pre-lien notice to the owner and to the original contractor. But my general tip, in order to satisfy your pre-lien notice, just go ahead and send it to all upstream parties. So to the extent you find yourself as a second or third tier subcontractor on the job, go ahead and send it to everybody you are aware of upstream of you, the subcontractor you're in privity with, as well as the general contractor and the owner. It does not hurt to let more people know, hey guys, I've performed work and I remain unpaid. Let everyone know. All right, when do you need to send this pre-lien notice by? You're going to need to send it by the 15th day of the third month after the labor or materials were provided. So let's look at a hypothetical here with our handy chart. So say you performed work in April, May, and June of 2022, and you remain unpaid. When is your deadline going to be in order to perfect a lien for unpaid April work? You're going to need to make sure and send your pre-lien notice by July 15th. And within that notice, you'll want to include, these are the outstanding amounts for the work I performed back in April that remains unpaid. Now, in general, you're just going to want to go ahead, you're sending out this notice July 15th for April unpaid work, but you've performed work in May and June that also remains unpaid. You want to go ahead and include that in your pre-lien notice. Be sure and be all inclusive of the amounts of work that you've performed, when they were performed, and so for May and June, you perform that work, it remains outstanding. So your pre-lien notice sent out, July 15th should be all inclusive of all work performed and that remains unpaid. Okay, how do you send the pre-lien notice? You're going to want to send it certified mail, return receipt requested. That's the recommended means for sending it out in Texas, because once that pre-lien notice gets into the hands of the United States Postal Service, it is deemed as delivered, regardless of whether or not the Postal Service loses your mail or otherwise. that is going to be always the recommended method for sending out your pre-lien notice. Now, I'll also recommend sending it via FedEx and or UPS. The reason, and we'll get into this a little bit more later in the presentation, is because these methods tend to be faster than certified mail. It can take 5 to 7 days for certified mail sometimes, whereas FedEx or UPS, you can get it overnighted. And when you send it faster, you get it into the hands of the owner just that much quicker, which is going to be important when we talk about a concept called fund trapping. And trapping funds in the hands of the owner is going to be critical. I also recommend making sure you keep a copy of your certified mail receipts, just to be able to confirm in the event you have to file foreclosure on your lien, you've got a copy of the fact that you sent it certified mail. All right, step number 2, record your lien affidavit. So the statute's very clear on what needs to be included in your lien affidavit. I'm not going to go through each and every single one of these, but this is generally a list of the information that needs to be included in your lien affidavit when you record it. When does it need to be recorded by? So your lien affidavit has to be recorded by the 15th day of the 4th month after your work is completed. So again, let's go back to our hypothetical. And so again, you performed work in April, May, and June of 2022 that remains unpaid. Say you complete your work in June, your deadline for recording your lien affidavit is going to be October 15th of 2022. All right, where does the lien affidavit have to be recorded? It needs to be recorded in the real property records of the county in which the property is located. And so be cognizant as well of the location of the project. Specifically, if you're a materials supplier and you are, just shipping the materials to the job site, but the job site is very, very rural. In those instances, sometimes the county clerks, they don't authorize for electronic recording. And so when you have that 15th day of the 4th month deadline in a county where there is no electronic recording, you have to make sure you're acting well in advance in order to mail off an original copy of your lien affidavit that's notarized in order to meet your deadline. And so that's why I mentioned just be real cognizant of the location of the project. In most Texas counties, that will not be the case, and there is electronic recording permitted, which can be done same day. All right, step number 3, send your notice after recording your lien affidavit. So this is just a notice that going out to advise everyone that you have recorded a lien affidavit in the real property records. Who does this notice need to be provided to? Same as the pre-lien notice, it needs to go to the owner and the general contractor by law. But the practice tip I always give, again, is to just go ahead and send it to all the upstream parties in the event that you find yourself a second-tier subcontractor or lower. When does that post-lien notice, as I like to call it, need to be sent by? It needs to be sent within 5 days of recording the lien affidavit. But my general practice tip in order to satisfy step number 3 is to just go ahead and send your post-lien notice on the same date that you record your lien affidavit. Then you'll avoid, the risk of forgetting to send your post-lien notice. So something new in the statutes as of 2022 is the calculation of time as it applies to each of these deadlines that we've talked about for step 1, 2, and 3. And it's that if your deadline of, say, the 15th day of the 3rd month for your unpaid materials and labor, your pre-lien notice needs to go out. If that deadline happens to fall on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday, essentially dates in which the United States Postal Service is not working, the statute permits that the deadline is extended to the following day that is not a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. And so that provides a great benefit if you realize that, oh shoot, the 15th is a Sunday and I'm not going to be able to send out my notice. But again, my general practice tip is that, you know, these are all deadlines. There's no harm in doing any of this early. And so, you know, to the extent you see that the 15th falls on the weekend, my recommendation is going to be to go ahead and get it done the Friday before, and only utilize this extension of time permitted under the statute in a pinch. But to the extent you know that there's payment issues, act early. There's no harm in doing things early. There's only harm if you miss any of these deadlines. All right, so now that we've talked about how you've perfected your lien, now, generally speaking, you have two types of claims available to you. You have a claim against the contracting entity for non-payment, and then your perfected mechanics lien gives you a claim as against the owner. But the owner's liability is limited, and it's limited to two separate types of funds that we're going to go into. The first is called reserved funds, and the second is trap funds. And I want to go through these because sometimes knowing the type of liability that the owner has will change the way in which you go about evaluating the time in which you have to send out your pre-lien notice and record your lien affidavit. So let's go into each of these. So the reserved fund is a fund that the owner is required to retain on all Texas projects from the general contractor throughout the course of the project. And it is equal to 10% of the original contract price, or if the project is ongoing, it's going to be 10% of the value of the work performed. And the owner, by law, is required to withhold these funds until 30 days after the contract is completed. Okay, so knowing that, if you want to perfect a lien as against the reserved fund that the owner is going to be liable for, you're going to need to send proper pre-lien notice, which we've discussed. And then you're going to need to record your lien affidavit by the 30th day after the project is completed, terminated, or abandoned. And that makes sense because the owner is permitted to release the reserved funds to the general contractor 30 days after the project is completed. And so you'll want to make sure and record your lien affidavit no later than 30 days after the project is completed, terminated, or abandoned. So you might be thinking, wait a minute, Emily, you just told me I had until the 15th day of the 4th month after I completed my work to get my lien recorded. That's not always going to be the case when you perform your work near the completion of the project. You're not going to want to say wait the 3 months to send out your pre-lien notice or wait the 4 months to record your lien affidavit. You're going to need to act quickly to the extent that you perform your work that remains unpaid towards the completion of the project in order to ensure that you are able to go after the owner for the reserved funds. All right, so number 2 liability of an owner is for trapped funds, which I referenced earlier, and that these funds are funds that the owner pays to the general contractor after receiving a pre-lien notice and without withholding the funds sufficient to satisfy the amounts claimed in the pre-lien notice. So that goes back to why I recommended sending your pre-lien notice via FedEx or UPS, because getting that pre-lien notice into the hands of the owner is critical to trap those funds there and not let them release those funds to the general contractor. And so, yes, it's always to your advantage to send your pre-lien notice out to the owner as soon as a payment problem becomes evident. All right, so we've covered notice after recording the lien affidavit. And so step number 4, we're looking at filing suit to foreclose. To the extent that perfecting your lien, sending your post lien notice doesn't get you paid, you're going to want to file suit to foreclose. When do you need to do that by? You're going to need to file suit to foreclose within 1 year after the last day that the claimant could file the lien affidavit. So generally speaking, you have until the 15th day of the 4th month after you completed your work to record your lien affidavit. So you're going to need to file suit within 1 year after that last day in which you could have recorded your lien affidavit. All right, so these are your 4 steps to perfecting a lien, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was, as always, very, very informative. At the moment, we don't have any questions, but we'll go to another slide that people can utilize if they want to use. On the next slide, there's a QR code.
Oh, perfect.
If anyone would like to, you could take your camera right up to the screen, and this is a place where you could download a project information sheet. Emily was explaining how essential it is to get the right information on your notices, and you can certainly use that project information sheet. You can provide that to your sales representative, whoever's doing the intake of the information. So we'll hold that up there for one more second, and then we have one more QR code. We would, on our next screen, if you would be so kind as to, beautiful, if you want to just take a moment and leave us a review if you enjoyed the presentation. We would very, very much appreciate that. And Emily is going to be giving 2 more webinars this year. And we have the information here. What happens after I record my lien? How do I get paid? And getting paid faster with liens, bonds, and contracts. So we are looking forward to having her conduct those 2 webinars. And Emily, amazing job.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. I wish everyone a sunny day. And if anyone has any more any questions that you think of after the webinar, here's Emily's contact information. She's a superb construction attorney. Many people say they can practice certain areas of law, but she is truly an expert in construction law, and we highly recommend our customers to Emily's law firm, Porter Hedges. All right, well, we wish everyone a sunny day. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.